I always thought family dinners were a safe haven, a time when the trivialities of daily life were set aside in favor of warmth, laughter, and the comfort of being together. I had looked forward to our annual gatherings with a quiet anticipation, imagining them as a sanctuary where even our flaws could be forgotten for a night. That evening, however, turned out to be a turning point I never saw coming. I had spent most of the day anxiously preparing for our dinner at my brother's new house, a sleek modern home that perfectly mirrored his self-assured demeanor. I knew my brother, Andrew, as a man who carried himself with an arrogance that bordered on entitlement, a man who believed his success and polished exterior gave him an air of invincibility. He had always enjoyed a certain respect, or rather, admiration, from our extended family, and even from those of us who were not so easily impressed by his bravado. I, on the other hand, was the quieter one, the observer who preferred sincerity over posturing. For years, I had been both proud of and deeply envious of Andrew's accomplishments. He was the golden child in our family, successful in his career, charming in his social circles, and, most importantly, seemingly flawless in his personal life. His wife, Elena, had always appeared as the perfect complement to his polished image. I, who had forged a close bond with my best friend, Sarah, over countless shared secrets and late-night confessions, could not help but notice subtle cracks behind Andrew's immaculate exterior. It was as if the more he flaunted his achievements, the more he concealed the vulnerabilities that lay beneath. And though I had never openly confronted him about it, there was an undercurrent of tension whenever he boasted or belittled others. That fateful evening began like any other family dinner. The moment I arrived at Andrew's house, I was struck by the immaculate decor and the cool efficiency with which everything was arranged. The dining room was a minimalist masterpiece, crisp white tablecloth, delicate silverware, and tasteful floral arrangements that exuded understated elegance. I greeted Andrew with a warm smile, but his greeting was tinged with the familiar air of superiority, a half-smile that said, "I know I'm better than you in every way." I tried to brush it off as a quirk of his personality, something I had grown used to over the years. I also exchanged pleasantries with Elena, who was equally composed and graceful, yet I sensed a distance in her eyes, a fleeting moment of hesitance before she offered a polite smile. As the dinner progressed, conversation flowed around trivial topics, updates on work, light-hearted banter about the weather, and the usual well-worn family anecdotes that always left me with a bittersweet taste in my mouth. I found solace in my seat, quietly savoring every morsel of the carefully prepared meal while observing the dynamics unfolding at the table. I had often felt like an outsider in our family gatherings, not because I lacked affection for them, but because I had always been more attuned to the unspoken tensions, the hidden truths that lay beneath our polished conversations. Tonight, that intuition prickled with a strange urgency. It was just after the main course, as dessert was being arranged with methodical precision by our hosts, that Elena finally spoke in a voice that cut through the ambient murmur of polite chatter. Her tone was calm, almost too calm, and it silenced the room for a heartbeat before she continued. "I think it's time you all know the truth," she said, her eyes locking onto each family member in turn, pausing finally on me as if seeking silent support. The atmosphere shifted instantly, a heavy silence replaced the easy laughter, and all eyes turned to her. I could see Andrew's expression falter, his confident mask slipping as uncertainty clouded his features. I felt my heart start to race, unsure whether to brace for an explosion or to silently retreat into the background. Elena's next words fell like stones in the quiet room. "Andrew, I've been carrying a secret for too long," she began, her voice steady but laced with an undeniable tremor. "I have to be honest with everyone, even if it shatters everything we've built." I could feel the tension tighten around the room like a vice, and I noticed Sarah's hand slip into my own under the table, a silent gesture of solidarity that made my throat tighten. I had known Sarah for years. She was not only my best friend but the person who had seen me through some of my darkest days. Her touch was reassuring, a reminder that even if tonight unraveled everything, I wouldn't be alone. Elena took a deep breath, her eyes glistening with tears that betrayed years of held-back pain. "Andrew, I know you pride yourself on your perfection and your ability to rise above the ordinary, but you've been living a lie," she continued, her voice gaining strength as she spoke the words that would forever alter our family's dynamic. "For over a year now, I've been unfaithful. I never wanted to hurt you, but I can't continue living in deceit. I had an affair." Her voice broke for a moment as she hesitated, then steadied herself. "I was with Sarah." A collective gasp swept through the room, the sound echoing off the pristine walls as if in condemnation. I felt as if the ground had shifted beneath me, and in that instant, my worst fears crystallized into a single, horrifying reality. My best friend, the person who had shared my deepest secrets and held my hand through years of struggle, was the one who had been part of this clandestine betrayal. I could see shock and disbelief contorting Andrew's face, his eyes wide and uncomprehending as if he had been struck by lightning. His usually impeccable composure gave way to raw vulnerability, a side of him that I had never witnessed before. For what felt like an eternity, no one spoke. The clatter of silverware and the soft hum of the refrigerator were the only sounds in a room that had suddenly become a theater of raw emotion. I felt a surge of conflicting feelings, the sting of betrayal for my friend, the agony of witnessing my brother's unraveling pride, and a deep, almost paralyzing sadness that seemed to fill every corner of my being. I looked at Sarah, whose eyes were brimming with tears, and in that moment, I knew that nothing would ever be the same. Andrew's voice finally emerged, weak and trembling. How could you?" he stammered, the words barely audible as he struggled to comprehend the revelation. His arrogance, which had been his shield for so long, now crumbled into a pitiful display of hurt and betrayal. Elena continued, her voice softening as she explained that the affair had begun during a time when she felt isolated and unappreciated, a time when the carefully maintained facade of their marriage had begun to crack. "I didn't plan for this to happen," she said, her eyes glistening with remorse. "I never meant to hurt you, Andrew. I thought I was making a choice for myself, but I can see now that I've hurt more than I ever imagined." In that moment, every long-held resentment, every quiet accusation that had simmered beneath the surface of our family gatherings, burst forth. I felt an overwhelming need to speak, to release the torrent of emotions that had built up over years of unspoken pain, but the shock left me momentarily mute. I sat there, frozen in disbelief, as the room descended into chaos. Some family members attempted to intervene, voices raised in anger and sorrow, while others sank into stunned silence, trying desperately to process the magnitude of what had just been revealed. I remember feeling a deep, piercing betrayal not just for Andrew's shattered pride, but for the dismantling of the perfect image I had held of my own closest relationships. The friend I had trusted implicitly, the friend who had celebrated my triumphs and shared my sorrows, had become the catalyst for a family rift that threatened to tear us apart. The revelation felt like a blow to my heart, a realization that even the bonds I cherished most could be fragile and fallible. 4 hours after the confession, I wandered through the silent corridors of Andrew's house, my mind a whirlwind of disjointed thoughts and raw emotion. I replayed every memory of shared laughter with Sarah, the countless late-night conversations, the times when we confided in each other about our deepest fears, and felt an acute sting of loss. I wondered if I had ever truly known her or if I had been blinded by the comforting familiarity of our friendship. At the same time, I felt a complex mix of pity and anger for my brother. His haughty demeanor, which had always seemed unassailable, had been reduced to a trembling mask of regret and disbelief. I saw in his eyes the painful consequences of living a life built on pretense and pride, and it made me question the very foundation of our family values. The rest of the dinner unfolded in a blur of hushed whispers and tearful exchanges. Family members tried in vain to console one another, their attempts to restore order only highlighting the irreparable damage that had been done. I found myself retreating to a quiet corner of the room, where I sat silently, absorbing every anguished word and shattered sigh. The events of that night had irreversibly altered the dynamics between us all. I knew that the journey ahead would be fraught with difficult conversations, painful reckonings, and a painstaking process of rebuilding trust and forgiveness. As the evening drew to a close, I stepped outside into the cool night air, hoping that the stars above might offer some small measure of solace. I walked slowly, my thoughts swirling around the events of the dinner, the collapse of Andrew's arrogance, the heartbreaking confession of Elena, and the painful betrayal by Sarah, whose friendship had once been a beacon of hope in my life. I wondered how it was possible for people I loved to be capable of such devastating actions, and yet, amidst the overwhelming sorrow, a quiet determination began to kindle within me. I realized that I could not allow this revelation to shatter my own sense of self or the love I still held for my family, flawed as they were. Instead, I resolved to seek the truth behind the unraveling facade, to confront my own emotions head-on, and to eventually learn how to forgive, not for their sake, but for my own healing. In the days that followed, I found myself oscillating between shock, anger, and a fragile hope that perhaps time would mend the broken bonds. I reached out to Sarah, desperate for an explanation, for any hint that our friendship had not been built on deceit. Our conversation was agonizingly slow, punctuated by long pauses and reluctant admissions. She told me how the affair had started, how she had been drawn to the excitement of a forbidden liaison, and how, in a moment of weakness, she had failed to see the profound impact of her betrayal. Her words did little to ease my pain, but they forced me to confront the complexities of human emotion, the recognition that even the closest of bonds could be tainted by imperfection and error. At the same time, I grappled with my own internal struggles, memories of past hurts, long-held insecurities, and the constant fear that I was not worthy of the love and loyalty I had once taken for granted. The dinner had exposed not only the faults in our family but also the vulnerability that lay within me, a vulnerability I had long tried to hide behind a facade of quiet strength. In facing this painful reality, I began to understand that true healing required embracing every aspect of myself, the tenderness, the resilience, and even the scars of betrayal. That night, lying awake in the dark of my own room, I made a silent vow. I would no longer allow the arrogance of others to dictate my sense of worth. I would embark on a journey of self-discovery, determined to rebuild the pieces of my identity that had been shattered by betrayal. I began writing again, pouring my heart into journal entries that spanned pages and pages, each word a step toward reclaiming the person I once was and forging the path to who I could become. I wrote of the pain, of the anger and sorrow, but also of the glimmer of hope that dared to emerge from the wreckage of that fateful dinner. In the quiet solitude of those early hours, as the first light of dawn began to creep through my window, I felt the stirring of something new, a determination to rise from the ashes of betrayal and to rebuild my life on a foundation of honesty, resilience, and self-love. I knew that the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, that forgiveness might never come easily, but I also recognized that this painful chapter was not the end of my story. It was merely the beginning of a journey that would require me to confront the past, learn from the scars it left behind, and ultimately find a way to trust in the beauty of human imperfection. I walked out into the soft light of the new day with a heavy heart and a mind full of questions. As I looked back at the dark silhouette of the house where the dinner had taken place, I felt a pang of sorrow for the innocence lost and the bonds irreparably damaged. But I also felt an unwavering determination to carve out a future where I would no longer be defined by the arrogance or betrayal of others, a future where I could embrace my own vulnerability as a source of strength rather than a sign of weakness. In that moment, I resolved to take one small, deliberate step forward. I would begin by reaching out to those who had been affected by the revelations of that night, not with anger or condemnation, but with a desire to understand and, perhaps, to heal together. I knew that I could not change what had transpired, but I could choose how I moved forward from it. With each passing day, I vowed to confront the pain head-on, to question the assumptions that had once defined me, and to rebuild the trust that had been so ruthlessly shattered. And so, as the new day unfolded, I carried with me the bittersweet knowledge that while some wounds might never fully heal, every scar was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a story of survival, of growth, and ultimately, of the quiet, steadfast hope that even in the aftermath of betrayal, we have the power to rise again. In the days after that unforgettable dinner, the atmosphere in our family shifted imperceptibly at first, then with an ever-quickening intensity that left me breathless. I found myself adrift in a world where every whispered conversation and sideways glance was loaded with judgment, betrayal, and the heavy sorrow of secrets laid bare. The revelation had fractured our once stolid family image. Andrew's formerly unassailable arrogance had crumbled into a state of shock and shame, while Elena's confession reverberated in every corner of our lives like an echo I could neither silence nor forget. And at the heart of it all, I was left to pick up the pieces of a reality that no longer made sense, a reality where my best friend, Sarah, had been complicit in a betrayal that shattered the foundation of trust one had held dear. For the first few nights, I wandered through the empty corridors of my own home as if seeking refuge from the chaos. Sleep came in fitful, haunted bursts, and I awoke drenched in sweat with the echoes of that night still pounding in my ears. Every memory of our family dinners, once filled with casual laughter and effortless chatter, now felt tainted by the bitter tang of deception. I remember sitting alone at my kitchen table in the early hours of one particularly cold morning, staring at the remnants of a hastily emptied teacup. The silence was oppressive, as if the walls themselves were mourning what had been lost. In that quiet despair, I began to wonder if I could ever trust anyone again, and, most hauntingly, if I could ever trust myself. The first step toward confronting the fallout came unexpectedly. A week after that shattering evening, my mother, who had been the quiet pillar of our family for as long as I could remember, called me to her house. Her voice was soft yet tremulous when she spoke. "I need you here," she said, her words heavy with unspoken sorrow. I didn't hesitate. I drove to her house with a mind swirling with questions and a heart heavy with a mixture of anger and pity. When I arrived, the living room was dimly lit, and the air carried a palpable heaviness, a silence that spoke of things too painful to voice. My mother motioned for me to sit, and as I did, she began to speak haltingly about the night's events. "I never imagined that our family would come to this," she whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. "Your brother's pride was something I always took for granted, and now everything is unraveling." Her words did not bring comfort, they only deepened the wound. I wanted to shout, to demand that she see the truth of what had happened, but instead, I listened in silence as she recounted her own sense of betrayal, both by her husband's complicity in maintaining a facade and by the actions of those closest to her. In that moment, I recognized that the scandal was not simply about Andrew's public humiliation or Elena's painful confession. It was a mirror held up to every one of us, revealing the cracks in the carefully constructed image of our family. Over the next several days, I found myself caught in a tumult of conflicting emotions. At work, colleagues whispered sympathetic remarks, their eyes filled with pity, while strangers on the street seemed to sense that something was profoundly wrong. I began to isolate myself, retreating into long hours of solitary writing and walks through the cold, indifferent city streets. I documented every thought, every tear, every pang of anger and sorrow in a journal that quickly became the repository for my rawest emotions. I wrote about the way Andrew's arrogance had finally been deflated, about the quiet heartbreak that now defined our family gatherings, and about the betrayal of Sarah, a betrayal so profound that it felt as though the very ground beneath my feet had been ripped away. One afternoon, while sitting in a cramped corner of a local cafe, I overheard a conversation between two women discussing the scandal. Their voices were hushed, and I could barely catch fragments of their words, but one phrase struck me deeply: she was always too trusting. It was as if they were talking about me. The notion that my inherent openness, a trait I had long mistaken for weakness, had been the target of exploitation made my blood run cold. In that moment, I realized that I needed to understand the full scope of what had happened, not only to process my own pain but also to reclaim the parts of myself that had been shattered by this betrayal. I reached out to Sarah that very evening. I remember dialing her number with trembling fingers, my heart pounding as I prepared to confront the friend I had trusted with my deepest secrets. When she answered, her voice was tentative, almost fearful. "I know you must be hurting," she began, her tone laced with regret. "I never meant for any of this to happen." I pressed her for details, the moments, the reasons, the feelings that had led her to cross that unforgivable line. The conversation was agonizingly slow, punctuated by long silences as she struggled to find the right words. She admitted that the affair had begun as a misguided attempt to fill a void she'd felt for years, a void that had nothing to do with me. Yet, the deeper I probed, the more I realized that her actions had been entangled with her own desperate need for validation, a need that had driven her to seek comfort in the arms of my brother. As I listened, I felt a surge of conflicting emotions, a deep sorrow for the pain she was now in, an anger at her betrayal, and a profound sense of loss for the friend I thought I had known. I told her that while I couldn't excuse her actions, I needed her to understand the gravity of the hurt she had inflicted, not just on me, but on everyone who had once believed in the sanctity of our bond. That conversation did little to heal the wound, but it forced me to confront a painful truth, that trust, once broken, could never be fully restored in the same way. It was a realization that both shattered and liberated me, forcing me to rebuild my understanding of friendship and loyalty from the ground up. Meanwhile, within the family, tensions continued to mount. Andrew, whose once commanding presence now seemed diminished and forlorn, retreated further into silence. Family members were divided, some called for harsh judgment and even exile, while others pleaded for forgiveness and a return to the way things had been before the scandal. At one particularly fraught dinner, I watched as heated arguments erupted over long-suppressed grievances. My uncle's booming voice filled the room as he denounced the affair as a moral failing, while my cousin wept openly, lamenting the loss of an idealized family image. I found myself torn between empathy for their pain and a growing realization that no one was blameless in this tragedy. Each of us had, in our own way, contributed to a culture of perfection that had left little room for honest emotion or true vulnerability. One evening, as the weight of it all threatened to crush me, I found a small measure of solace in a local support group for those scarred by family betrayal. In a modest, warmly lit community center, a circle of strangers gathered, each person a tapestry of broken dreams and hard-won resilience. There, I listened to stories that echoed my own, tales of lost trust, of loved ones who had let them down, of personal battles waged in the quiet hours of the night. As one by one, each person shared their own journey from hurt to healing, I felt a stirring within me, a recognition that I was not alone in my struggle. The collective vulnerability of that group became a balm, a gentle reminder that while betrayal could wound deeply, it could also be the catalyst for profound personal transformation. Over time, I began to see the events of that fateful dinner not solely as an end, but as a beginning, a painful prologue to a journey of self-discovery. I threw myself into therapy with a renewed determination, exploring the long-buried roots of my own trust issues and coming face-to-face with the shadows of past hurts. I learned to recognize that my willingness to trust was not a flaw, but a testament to my capacity for love and hope. With each session, I slowly began to dismantle the internal narratives that had once made me feel unworthy, replacing them with affirmations of my own value and resilience. At the same time, I sought to reclaim my voice through creative expression. I returned to my old passion for writing, channeling the raw pain of betrayal into stories and poems that spilled out onto the pages of my journal. With each carefully chosen word, I felt as if I were stitching together the pieces of a self that had been torn apart by deception. I wrote not only about the anguish of that dinner and the betrayal of Sarah, but also about the quiet moments of beauty that still existed in the world, the soft light of dawn breaking through a window, the steady pulse of life in a bustling city street, the gentle support of a friend who offered a warm embrace when words failed. In that creative space, I began to see that even the deepest scars could serve as a map of survival, a testament to the strength that comes from enduring the unendurable. In the midst of this tumultuous period, an unexpected opportunity for reconciliation presented itself. Andrew, who had spent the days following the dinner in a state of introspection and silent remorse, reached out to me with an invitation to join him and Elena for a family retreat. He proposed a weekend away from the relentless scrutiny of daily life, a chance for all of us to come together in a quiet, natural setting and confront the fractured bonds that had defined our recent history. I hesitated at first, wary of reopening wounds that had barely begun to heal. But as I mulled over the idea, I realized that perhaps this retreat was not a naive attempt to gloss over the past, but an honest endeavor to rebuild our connections with unvarnished truth. The retreat took place at a rustic lodge nestled in a wooded valley, far removed from the prying eyes of the city and the relentless chatter of gossip. The air was crisp and invigorating, and the natural beauty of the landscape offered a stark contrast to the grim memories that still haunted me. Over the course of the weekend, we gathered for long, candid conversations around a crackling fire. There were moments of raw emotion, tears shed in quiet corners, long silences filled with unspoken pain, and tentative attempts at humor that felt both fragile and precious. Andrew admitted that he had been blind to the emotional undercurrents that had long existed within our family, and he expressed a deep remorse that resonated in the hollow spaces where his arrogance had once reigned. Elena, too, broke down, confessing the torment of living a double life and the crushing guilt that had driven her to this desperate act of confession. In one particularly poignant moment, as the firelight danced in our eyes, I found myself speaking out, voicing the pain I had long suppressed, the sense of betrayal that had gnawed at me with relentless fury. I spoke of the loss of trust, not only in Sarah, who had once been my closest friend, but in the ideals I had once held dear about loyalty and honesty. That night, under a star-studded sky, as we sat in a circle of shared vulnerability, something shifted inside me. I realized that healing would require more than just painful admissions. It would require a willingness to see each other as flawed human beings, capable of both enormous love and unfathomable mistakes. I saw in Andrew a man who was learning the hard lesson that pride and arrogance could only lead to isolation, and in Elena, I saw the regret of a woman who had sacrificed too much of herself in the pursuit of a facade. I realized that our family, as fractured as it was, still held within it the potential for renewal, a chance to rebuild our bonds on the basis of authenticity, however messy and imperfect that might be. In the days following the retreat, I felt a cautious optimism begin to replace the pervasive sadness that had defined the previous weeks. I returned home with a sense of purpose, a determination to continue my journey of self-healing and to forge a new identity that was not tied to the mistakes of the past. I kept writing in my journal, filling its pages with reflections on the retreat, on the brave confessions that had taken place, and on the delicate promise of forgiveness. I reconnected with friends who had stood by me throughout the turmoil, finding in them a renewed sense of community and a reminder that I was not alone. At the same time, I began to explore new interests, attending art classes, joining a hiking group, and even volunteering at a local shelter, each small step a declaration that I was reclaiming my life. In these endeavors, I discovered a quiet joy in the act of rebuilding, a joy that was raw, unpolished, and entirely my own. I learned to laugh again, to trust again in the beauty of genuine connection, even if that trust was now tempered by the hard lessons of betrayal. Yet, even as I moved forward, the memory of that dinner and the raw emotions it had unleashed would occasionally surge back with unexpected force. There were nights when I found myself revisiting the painful details, the look of disbelief on Andrew's face, the tremor in Elena's voice, the haunting silence that had followed Sarah's confession. I allowed myself to feel the pain fully, knowing that true healing meant not denying the past but integrating it into the mosaic of who I was becoming. Each tear, each moment of heartache, became a part of my story, a story that was evolving from one of betrayal into one of resilience and transformation. Now, as I look back on those turbulent weeks from the vantage point of time, I see that the journey toward healing was not a linear path but a labyrinth of emotions and revelations. I came to understand that forgiveness, in its truest form, was not about excusing wrongdoing, but about liberating myself from the heavy chains of resentment and despair. I learned to accept that some bonds, once broken, might never be fully restored, but that from their fragments, a stronger, more authentic self could emerge. In the quiet aftermath of that family retreat, I sat down one crisp morning to write a letter to myself, a promise that I would continue to honor my journey, that I would nurture the seeds of hope planted during those fragile moments of shared vulnerability. I wrote about the pain, yes, but also about the unexpected beauty that had arisen from it, the realization that even in the darkest of times, there is a spark of light waiting to be kindled. That letter became a touchstone, a reminder that every ending carried within it the potential for a new beginning. And as I continue to navigate this unpredictable landscape of healing and growth, I hold fast to the belief that every scar is a story of survival, every tear a testament to the strength of the human spirit. I have learned to trust again, not blindly, but with a cautious, measured openness that honors the lessons of the past while embracing the promise of the future. As I pen these words, I am filled with a quiet determination to keep moving forward, to continue rewriting my story in a way that is entirely my own. The betrayal of that fateful dinner, the unraveling of family facades, and the painful admission of secrets will forever be chapters in my life's narrative. But they are not the entirety of my story. They are the crucible in which I have been remade, a reminder that even when those we hold dear betray us, we have the power to rise from the ashes and create a life that is richer, deeper, and more profoundly our own. I remember the first time I truly felt the shifting tides of our family's fracture, that heavy, almost unbearable night when the echoes of that dinner still haunted every silent corner of my heart. In the weeks after our painful retreat, when raw wounds began to slowly seal with the gentle caress of time and honest reflection, I embarked on a journey of personal reckoning. I had learned, in the bitter fire of betrayal, that life rarely offers us neat conclusions, but rather a mosaic of endings and beginnings woven together by the scars we bear and the hope we refuse to let go of. Now, I found myself at the precipice of a new chapter, a chapter that would require me to confront not just the betrayals of others, but also the intricate tapestry of my own hopes, insecurities, and dreams. In the quiet solitude of my apartment, the soft hum of early morning light filtering through half-drawn curtains became a daily reminder that every day offered a chance for rebirth. I began each morning with a ritual, a long, slow cup of coffee, an hour spent writing in my journal, letting the ink capture the kaleidoscope of my emotions. I recorded every fragment of thought, the lingering bitterness of that fateful dinner, the raw pain of Sarah's confession, and the sight of Andrew's broken pride. Yet, amid these memories, I also chronicled the tiny, almost imperceptible victories, a heartfelt conversation with an old friend who reminded me of my worth, the discovery of a new favorite book whose words resonated with my soul, or simply the quiet satisfaction of a walk in the park where each step seemed to ease the heaviness in my chest. One crisp morning, as I strolled along a winding trail in a nearby park, the vibrant tapestry of nature began to mirror my inner transformation. The trees, freshly budding and resolute against the chill of winter's end, reminded me that beauty can emerge from even the harshest conditions. I found myself smiling at a squirrel darting across my path, feeling, for the first time in months, that life was whispering promises of renewal. It was in moments like these that I realized the true power of resilience lies not in forgetting our pain, but in harnessing it to fuel our growth. Inspired by that day's gentle epiphany, I decided to channel my energy into creative pursuits that had long been neglected. I enrolled in a local writing workshop, determined to transform my tumultuous experiences into stories that might one day help someone else find solace in their own struggles. There, among a diverse group of writers, each with their own narrative of heartache and healing, I rediscovered the catharsis of storytelling. The workshop became a sanctuary where I could finally let go of the past, sharing the painful chapters of my life with people who listened not with judgment, but with empathy and understanding. In the process, I began to understand that vulnerability, far from being a weakness, was a powerful tool that connected us all. As I immersed myself in writing, I also rekindled relationships that had once seemed irrevocably lost. I reached out to Sarah, despite the sting of her betrayal, knowing that clinging to resentment would only prolong my own suffering. We met at a quiet cafe one rainy afternoon, a place where time seemed to slow down and the gentle patter of raindrops created a cocoon of privacy. Our conversation was tentative at first, filled with long pauses and hesitations as we navigated the wreckage of trust. Sarah, her eyes downcast and voice quivering, recounted the tangled emotions that had led her astray, the loneliness, the desire for excitement, and the selfish need for validation. I listened, my heart aching with every word, yet I found within me a surprising capacity for forgiveness. In that vulnerable exchange, I realized that we were both, in our own ways, prisoners of our past mistakes. I told her that while I could never forget what had happened, I was willing to work toward understanding it, not to excuse the betrayal, but to find a way to move beyond it. That conversation did not mend our bond overnight, but it planted the seeds of healing, a slow process of rebuilding trust and redefining what it meant to be a friend. Simultaneously, I began to reconnect with Andrew. His once aloof arrogance had given way to a palpable remorse that I recognized from the confessions we shared at the retreat. One evening, as we sat together on the back porch of our childhood home, a place steeped in memories both bitter and sweet, he spoke of the years lost to pride and the heavy price of living a lie. I was so blinded by the idea of perfection, he confessed, his voice thick with regret, that I never saw the damage it was causing to all of us. In that vulnerable moment, I saw not the unyielding, superior brother I had once envied, but a man burdened by his own shortcomings and desperate to make amends. We talked long into the night, our conversation a delicate dance between sorrow and forgiveness. It wasn't a magical fix, and I knew that our relationship would never be exactly as it once was. But in the soft glow of the porch light, amidst shared memories and quiet tears, I recognized that even the deepest betrayals could open the door to a more honest, authentic connection. As months turned into a season of tentative recovery, I threw myself into rebuilding every facet of my life. I joined a local volunteer group dedicated to community outreach, where I found that giving back helped mend the cracks in my own heart. Working alongside strangers who were united by a common goal, whether serving meals at a shelter, organizing community events, or simply lending a compassionate ear, offered me a glimpse of a world where kindness and genuine care could outshine the bitterness of past wounds. Each day spent in service was a reminder that while the scars of betrayal might never fully fade, they could be transformed into emblems of survival and empathy. In the quiet solitude of my creative space, I began writing a memoir, a raw, unfiltered account of the journey from the moment that family dinner shattered everything I thought I knew, to the gradual, painstaking steps I was taking toward self-discovery and renewal. Every page was an act of defiance against the narrative that had once defined me as a victim of betrayal. Instead, I was crafting a story of resilience, one that celebrated the messy, unpredictable nature of human relationships and the transformative power of forgiveness. I poured my heart into those pages, not with the intention of eliciting pity, but to honor the complexity of my own experiences and to serve as a beacon of hope for anyone who had ever felt betrayed or alone. The process of writing this memoir was both cathartic and daunting. I revisited moments I had long buried, the night of the dinner when the truth had exploded in a torrent of tears and shattered pride, the painful confrontation with Sarah, the quiet revelations in therapy sessions, and the gentle, restorative conversations with Andrew. Each recollection was a wound reopening, only to be tended with newfound understanding and self-compassion. There were nights when I wept over the ink on the pages, mourning the loss of innocence and the irrevocable changes that betrayal had wrought. And yet, as I wrote, I also began to see that every scar told a story of strength, a strength born from the courage to confront life's harshest realities and the unwavering will to rise again. One evening, during a particularly introspective writing session, I looked up from my journal and gazed out the window at the stars scattered across the night sky. In that vast, silent expanse, I felt both insignificant and infinitely connected to the world. It was then that I truly understood that healing was not about erasing the past, but about embracing it as a part of who I was, a mosaic of experiences, both beautiful and painful. The stars, each a distant beacon of light, reminded me that even in the darkest moments, there is hope, a quiet promise that tomorrow, with all its uncertainties, might bring the gentle light of renewal. In the days that followed, my life began to take on a new rhythm, a delicate balance of mourning and celebration, loss and hope. I continued to write and volunteer, and I even started forging new friendships with people who shared my passion for authenticity and resilience. At a small gathering of fellow writers at a local bookstore, I read excerpts from my memoir, my voice trembling with both vulnerability and conviction. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Strangers came up to me afterward, thanking me for sharing a story that resonated with their own struggles. In that moment, I realized that my journey, though marred by betrayal and heartbreak, had the power to inspire and heal others. It was a realization that filled me with a quiet pride and a renewed sense of purpose. Through all this, I never lost sight of the lessons I had learned about trust and forgiveness. I learned that trust, once broken, is not easily restored, but that it can be rebuilt, brick by brick, with honesty, vulnerability, and time. I learned that forgiveness is not a gift we bestow upon those who have hurt us, but a gift we give to ourselves, a release from the chains of resentment that bind us to the past. And I learned that even the deepest wounds can be transformed into sources of strength, if only we allow ourselves to face the pain with open hearts and unguarded souls. Now, as I sit here in the soft glow of a late afternoon, surrounded by the comforting clutter of my life, stacks of books, half-finished canvases, and journals filled with memories, I feel a profound sense of gratitude. I am grateful for the trials that have shaped me, for the betrayals that forced me to confront my own vulnerabilities, and for the quiet, persistent hope that has carried me through the darkest nights. I am learning, day by day, that my worth is not determined by the arrogance of others or the fleeting actions of those who betray me, but by the deep, unshakable truth that I am enough, just as I am. As I close the final chapter of this turbulent period of my life, I do so with a heart that is both heavy with the weight of past sorrows and light with the promise of tomorrow. I know that the scars I bear will always be a part of me, but they are also the emblems of a journey of survival, of self-discovery, and of the transformative power of love, both given and received. I have learned that life's most profound truths are not found in perfection, but in the honest acceptance of our imperfections, and in the courage to rise again after every fall. I look forward to the future with cautious optimism, knowing that while the road ahead may be fraught with challenges, I have within me a reservoir of strength that no betrayal can ever drain. I have learned to trust again, not blindly, but with a measured openness that honors both my past and the infinite possibilities of tomorrow. And in that trust, in that belief that even after the most devastating heartbreak, life can still bloom, I have found a quiet, enduring joy that will guide me, no matter how dark the night may seem. In this final chapter of my story, I embrace the complexity of my journey, the moments of piercing pain, the slow, painful process of healing, and the small, triumphant victories that have come along the way. I acknowledge that my family, with all its fractured bonds and shattered illusions, will never be the same again. But I also believe that from the ashes of betrayal, something new and beautiful can emerge, a truth that is raw, unvarnished, and profoundly human. And as I move forward, I carry with me the knowledge that every scar is a testament to my resilience, every tear a reminder of the strength of my spirit, and every day a chance to write a new chapter in the ongoing, unending story of who I am.